Buenas tardes desde Quito, Ecuador.
Good afternoon from Quito, Ecuador, headquarters of the Latin American Energy Organization. For logistical purposes, please note that we have simultaneous interpreting available in English and in Spanish. If you want to access these options, please click on the interpreting icon located at the bottom of your screens. Over there, you can choose the language that you want to listen to this panel in. On behalf of the Latin American Energy Organization and the IGB, please be most welcome to the 6th edition of the Energy Week. We would like to thank the support of our main sponsors on this 6th edition of the Energy Week, the World Bank that has been supporting us in this edition, as well as our strategic and media partners. We will now get started with Roundtable 1 on gender and energy. Right now, we will start with the moderation. Natalia Cunha from the World Bank, please be welcome. Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you to all of you who are joining us this morning or afternoon. Thank you for the information. Before presenting our distinguished panelists, I do want to explain about the significance of the power of data as a way of promoting public policies in the best way possible. We know that there are gender gaps that we face every single day. These gender gaps appear in multiple areas of our lives. For example, the fact that women do not receive any payments for the work they conduct in their households. And we also see that in the barriers and social risks that women suffer because of gender violence. And we also see how women suffer more because of climate change. And we also see that there is a lack of female presence in the workforce and in leadership positions. To understand the importance and the significance of these issues, we need to understand data to see where we are and where we can improve in order to remove obstacles for the use of certain services for women. I am most welcome I want to welcome all the panelists, and I am most happy to be here with you today. I want to introduce the panelists first. We have Roberto Jimenez. He is the General Regulator for the Public Services Regulator Agency in Costa Rica. He is an economist. He holds a PhD in public policies and an MA in economic policies. And he was the director of environmental planning in Costa Rica. He has also worked as an environmental economist, international auditor, teacher, and researcher. Apart from that, he is the representative of Costa Rica before the Board of Commissioners of the Regional Electricity Interconnection Commission, where he currently holds the presidency. So thank you, Roberto, for being here with us. It is a true joy to have you with us. I also want to introduce Maripaz Rodriguez Mer. She is a representative from the Ministry of Energy in Colombia. She works in social responsibility. She's a political scientist with an emphasis in public management from Pontificia Universidad Javeriana and holds a master's degree in social responsibility and sustainability from Universidad Externada de Colombia. She has extensive experience in planning, territorial autonomy, knowledge management, gender equity, and socio-environmental issues. And she currently works as a gender leader in the Office of Environmental and Social Affairs of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and she is in charge of supporting the mainstreaming of the approach in the sector. So thank you, Maribas, for being here and for sharing your experiences and initiatives with us. And last but not least, we have my esteemed colleague Gunchan Gautam. He is an energy specialist for the World Bank in the South Asia Energy Unit. He works on energy sector projects in Afghanistan, Nepal, and Pakistan, and co-leads the World Bank South Asia Gender and Energy Service called SAGE. SAGE has been supporting the South Asia Professional Network of Women in the Energy Sector called We Power and serves as the network's interim secretariat. And we will be hearing more about We Power in just a moment. Gunjan also holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in public policy with a specialization in energy policy. Thank you to the esteemed panelists for being here with us today. Thank you for your time. Before we move into the presentations that we have for today, I would like for all of you who are here with us to answer a couple of questions that we set up for today. We want to hear your opinion. So in just a moment, you will see a pop-up window with a couple of questions that we would like for you to answer. I will give you some minutes before the presentation. And the first question is, have you encountered any situation in which the lack of data on gender differences has prevented your organization from making a decision or made it difficult to make decisions? And the second one is, would you actively encourage your organization to collect data on gender differences? I'll give you a moment and then we'll get started with Roberto.
Sí que, Roberto, sí, sí, exactamente. Estamos uniéndolo en presentación. Y si queremos, compañeros de OLADE, podemos parar
Perhaps we can stop the poll to see what the results were.
Pues, bueno, tenemos bien interesantes estos resultados, ¿verdad?
So the results are very interesting for the first question. If you have ever encountered a situation in which the lack of data on the gender gap has prevented your organization from making a decision, we see that in most cases the answer was yes. I mean, some people said yes, but it is clear that it is important to continue investing in this. And pretty much everyone would actively encourage their organizations to collect data on gender gaps. So thank you for your answers and for participating. Roberto, the floor is yours. I will be timing you, so in a couple of minutes you will hear me say that you are being timed, okay? Yes, sure. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. The Public Services Regulating Agency is a multi-sector regulator, and within our agenda, we have been trying to get the biggest impact possible on society, and of course, women are members of society. So the work that we've been doing has been important because we want our regulations to have a human rights approach. And we know that women are one of the most significant users of our services. We actually carried out a survey and we wanted to know how many women were using our services. So our regulations have a human rights perspective. We want to provide women with the ability to use and access public services. And we know that these public services need to be specially targeted towards women. And in that case, our agency has been a pioneer in as much as we have a gender policy that without a doubt is a process. Within the country itself, we do not have that much data on information on women in connection to public services. And because of this, sometimes not the best decisions are made. So we set out to try to find information that would allow us to understand gender inequality within the context of public services. And relevant data that we got from this process is that 41.2% of households are led by women, 31.2% of those households are single women. We also know that 97% of women, without bearing in mind the geographical area, are in charge of household work. About 50% of women are in charge of paying for public services in the families that are within the first quintile of poverty, spend between about 30.8% of their family income to pay for public services. 50% of users of public transportation are women. In the case of the metropolitan area, that reaches 60%. For 2020, only 3% of social economy organizations that provide water were targeted by women. 70%, only 70% of women have a knowledge of how to read the use of these services, and it is women who actually have to make savings and try to find resources to pay for those bills, but still they do not know how to read their own consumption. So we realized it was important for women to learn and understand how to read their utility bills for water and for electricity in order to analyze whether or not they're being charged fairly. And only 30% of women are actually have a public service under their name. So women are the ones that generally pay for them, but the invoice is not under their name. So we defined a gender equality policy, and we did that at the highest level of the organizations. There was a will from the entirety of the board of directors to do this. And the gender policy, of course, seeks to carry out actions, strategic actions, to foster the decrease of gender gaps within public services. And we also wanted to have a cross-sectional gender approach in the institutional operation with regards to the SDGs. So we have an internal dimension and an external dimension. The specific objectives were to develop internal capacities within the organizations to raise awareness to the gender perspective. We wanted to strengthen the guidelines, tools, and other instruments within the institutions focused on gender and human rights. We also wanted to promote equality between men and women. We wanted to implement the gender equality perspective in all regulation processes. 5 minutes. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So we are trying to create a gender equality policy. So we're trying for all technical regulations, all services, focus on women. And we also wanted to develop strategic alliances with public and private institutions. So we wanted to work with the IMEX in charge of poverty and other institutions across the territory. With regards to the approaches, we focused on innovation and research as the basis and the groundwork for our project. So we worked together with the World Bank. We also wanted to effectively include women in the regulations of our institutions. We wanted to manage the regulations for the strengthening of the economic, physical autonomy of women and the decision-making processes made by women. We wanted to empower women, and we wanted to explain to them the regulations and tell them what their rights were. We also wanted to promote and strengthen public services from a human rights approach and social inclusions approach. Costa Rica is a small country, but a very heterogeneous country, and there are significant differences between men and women.
And then institutional management, that is very important to ensure that all those related regulations integrate those in our daily activities. the progress made so far. We carried out a survey that has been very important to try to understand the status of women when it comes to access to public services, what kind of interactions we can promote. It's a survey that has to do with public services that provides information from different sources, and that helps us to develop regulation strategies and also public policies. We designed an intervention strategy that is being implemented, taking into account all the aspects shown by the survey, and we're also implementing training courses to the poorest families in Costa Rica, together with a group of organisms and agencies that help us to take information to those women in charge of their families. In the year 2022, we will start a process of certification by a gender regulation in INAMO and UNDP to provide some gender perspective. The challenges ahead is to have disaggregated data by sex to get to know more about inequalities within the RSF and also in the public services, and also to be aware of how gender has to do with the way in which we approach this issue when providing public services, how to grant access, and how to make a differentiate that to bridge the gaps, also to raise awareness within our institution, and also to include these in all the technical regulations and the institutional policies applied. Also to generate strategic alliances. It is important to work with our other organizations, IMAS, IFAN, so that we can reach and cover the whole national territory in an efficient way, so that we can include women, especially those women in the rural areas, to make them part of this process. And we know that more than 30% of their budget goes to public services. So this survey, together with the policies implemented, will allow us to create the right conditions for development of public policies that integrate women, and this is having a positive impact to bridge the gaps so we can have an incidence, a positive impact in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you very much for complying with the time requirements. I'm a very strict moderator, as you can see, but thank you once again. Now we have a box for Q&A. Then I will tell you a little bit more about that. And Roberto, thank you once again for your excellent presentation on how important it is to have such an important regional initiative, something unique as the case of Costa Rica, especially those aspects about strategic alliances that we cannot work on our own if we want to bridge the gaps. Maripaz, you have the floor. Please, can you see my screen? Yeah, we can see it. Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, it's always a pleasure to be part of the events and get to know these activities and to disseminate knowledge on these areas, and especially the measures that aim at promoting equality and diversity. Just a brief overview. The Ministry of Mines and Energy is the agency in the Colombian government in charge of adopting policies for the sustainable use of energy resources in Colombia, promoting social development. organizational culture is very important to include all these gender perspectives to make it a real pledge. This has been led by the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Diego Mesa, and especially through the Office of Environmental Issues. I would like to start my presentation sharing with you some information to provide context to the current situation of women in general, and also how this um, can be applied to the women in our sector. First of all, women have faced challenges trying to have access and make progress in the job market. Why? Because they have little participation in the decision-making process. They have to deal with household chores, and also they work in informal jobs without any kind of social coverage. There's something that really concerns us, that is this low access of women uh, to STEM courses, science, technology, and mathematics that are required in our sector. And that has a very simple explanation, is that women, especially women in our region, have started their formal education process like 50 years ago. Still, many women have not access to these courses because they believe they lack the capacity to take those courses, and they show no interest in these courses. So on the one hand, we have a low percentage of women being trained in STEM courses, but even if they have access to these courses, most positions um, are in fact performed by men. Also, one study showed that of 70 companies working in the energy sector, female participation does not reach 27%, being even less in other sectors. Also, in this context, we saw that information was limited or non-existent when it comes to decision making. Basically, there was no connection between gender issues and the reality of the sector. We also saw there was a regulatory framework that was an opportunity. We have developed public policies focused on women's integration and to make this situation visible. For instance, in our National Development Plan, there's a special chapter that addresses this issue. We also have an office at presidency that deals with women issues, and we are aligned with the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Basically, gender equality is cross-cutting when compared to development. We cannot reach sustainable development without gender equality. So taking all this information into account, this is our roadmap. In 2019, we started a process for the construction of guidelines for gender equality in our sector. At the moment, this was unprecedented in Latin America. Basically, as you mentioned, we cannot make any progress in these issues without gender equality. We had some regional meetings. We collectively built all these concepts. We had a baseline that allowed us to analyze the situation of women, and after that, we define our framework to promote, strengthen, and coordinate initiatives focused on gender equality. One, from the job perspective, basically to include more women in direct jobs and indirect jobs, and also in the community approach. That is to say, having projects in this area with the communities living in the area of influence. We define 4 different pillars. One is the opportunities for women, then culture for gender equality, and that requires a cultural change. There's still a lot of resistance for women's inclusion. Third pillar has to do with coordinating all this. And the fourth pillar has to do with, and that's very special, it has to do with the prevention of gender violence in the industry. Not only in the industry, not only in our own management of organizations, but also the behavior within the communities of the area of influence of our projects. That in general, these are areas where there's still some social requirements that need to be fulfilled. So just in these 5 minutes, I want to give you an overview of the situation. So we have made progress in 3 or 4 areas. One that has to do with the internal management, because in our ministry, we are convinced that this integration of gender integration requires changes, not only in our role as we play as an organization, but also we need to set the example. What we did was to create a gender issues committee. We are the first public entity that implemented the Equipares label that has to do with gender equality. And this label was thought originally for a private company, but we are the first public pilot organization to do it. Then we have an e-learning course for anyone that is willing to take it. Basically, we talked about integration of the gender equality work. We also designed a communication strategy that is called Conéctate con la Equidad, that has to do with the cultural change required and helps us to promote all the guidelines regarding gender equality. The second area has to do with the management of the organization. And we did this through the creation or setting up an alliance for gender equality, basically because the companies represent us in the territory. And then Alliance for Gender Equality is composed of 34 companies of 3 subsectors. And the idea is that to transfer knowledge and continue working in this. Since we had no data, we built up a sectoral study together with more than 70 companies to try to identify the gaps in the job market and the best practices to be implemented. And we also have a program that is called Significative Experiences that is basically analyzing what is being done, which are the things that can be replicated, and we always give priority to these aspects. And then when it comes to management with other associates, we have worked together with the action plans by our entities. And these entities include the National Agency for Mining, for Hydrocarbons, the Planning Division. And what we did is to work together with them so that we can include the gender perspective in their management following these guidelines. We did this through an analysis of the situation and the contractors in our entities and try to cross that information together with other indicators, for instance, payments, academic level, and age groups. And that has to do with measuring and also to implement significant change. If women's participation is 40% in other sectors, so the ministry is promoting to increase those numbers within our internal management. We also have included a diagnosis strategy and guide to include the gender approach in plans, programs, and projects. This is what I wanted to share with you about the progress made in the ministry. This really, it's an ambitious plan, and we are very proud of it, proud of being, in fact, leaders in the region, and also being leaders and experts for other organizations that want to make progress in this area. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maripaz. Congratulations on your work and on your progress at the ministry, and also for taking the time. Thank you very much. Now we can see how there are very similar actions taking place in Costa Rica and in Colombia, but we have to look at data, and the data show that there are significant gaps when it comes to gender, and we need to address that issue, and different stakeholders have to pay attention to this, always in a coordinated way.
But let us go a bit more in depth in the discussion. So I now want to yield the floor to my colleague Gunjan. Gunjan will be telling us a bit about the We Power initiative, an initiative that we are immensely proud of at the World Bank. And we are pleased to be able to introduce this initiative to many regions beyond South Asia. So Gunjan, thank you very much for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Natalie. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks to Roberto and Maripas for very good presentations. One focusing on the service delivery and the other one focusing on employment. We probably are more like Colombia in what we do. And I'll try to, in my presentation, explain why we did what we did and what's been happening. Before that, I'm Gunjan Gautam. I'm with South Asia Energy Unit of the World Bank. I'm the project manager equivalent for South Asia Gender and Energy Facility. South Asia Gender Energy Facility, or SAGE, is the Secretariat of South Asia Women Power Sector Professional Network. Okay, so in this presentation, I'll try to explain how we started from anecdotal evidence. Then we collected evidence to form partnerships, and now that partnership is resulting in what we can call transformational change. Before that, just to familiarize you with what WePower is. WePower is a regional network of organizations in South Asia. Most of these organizations are electricity sector utilities, power sector utilities. And WePower has two objectives. One is to promote higher participation of women in the workforce. The other is to promote normative change regarding women and girls in STEM education. Now you may wonder why this is relevant in the South Asian context. The rationale for us was quite simple and straightforward. The South Asian energy sector is in a state of transition. It's changing. It's changing because of climate change. And it's also changing because of the adoption of the digital technology in the electricity business. This change creates opportunities for everyone, but also it creates opportunities for equitable distribution of employment opportunity, of employment. The sector needs more people. The sector should tap into more talented women engineers. And the sector seems to be interested in creating and employing more women engineers. But we didn't know this. We didn't know this before we did the baseline assessment in the 8 South Asian countries. So we knew that there's a gap. There's a lack of representation in the energy sector in South Asian countries. Not a lot of women are employed, but we didn't know how dire the situation was till we conducted the baseline assessment. And what we found was quite interesting. In summary, after extensive data collection and interviewing close to 500 people, what we found was not a lot of women go to STEM education programs. Not a lot of them then go to utility jobs. And in the utility jobs, not a lot of them stick to technical roles or are promoted to senior management roles. Why was the question that we were trying to answer. And what we found was much of it is because of the norms. While there are institutional barriers, while there is underinvestment in equitable infrastructure, a lot of the gaps are because of the norms, because of the societal norms, because of the lack of role models, because of the opportunities for upward mobility in the organizational setting. So what do we do to resolve these issues? We reached out to stakeholders already active in the sector, and we asked them what could be the best approach. They advised us that there is strong interest and we should launch a regional network. where we should ask every organization what changes they want to see along the 5 pillars, along STEM outreach, along recruitment, along professional development, along retention, and along policy and institutional changes. That was the beginning of We Power. Which,
5 minutes.
and thanks, Nathan. Which essentially is a partnership model where we ask our partners to commit to incremental gender activities along the 5 pillars and tell us about their achievements and the challenges they faced. It's a holistic approach in a sense that it starts with STEM education and then goes all the way to retention and as a cross-cutting element in policy and institutional change. We're very output-driven. We like to see what our partners are doing, and our partners like to tell us what they are doing, so that we have in essence we have a very strong monitoring and evaluation framework, which we use for sharing information and lessons between the partners. I'm very happy to report that We Power has about 28 partners. We have all the important South Asian utilities. We have a few international utilities and a few international companies. And we have our national partners in professional networks like IEEE, Women Engineers Pakistan, Women in Energy, Regional Network, etc. What does it mean to have 28 partners? In the span of 2 years, our 28 partners have implemented about 1,200 activities, and they've benefited over 20,000 women and girls. The activities range from actually hiring the women to providing internships, providing mentors, to taking girl students to a energy site, to a hydropower site, and getting them acquainted with what it means to be a hydropower engineer. That the partners are building facilities, the partners are implementing institutional policy adjustments. There's a lot of things that the partners are doing. We collect all of this data and we share all of this data. In 2021, our partners, despite COVID, have set a high target of implementing over 600 activities benefiting about 11,000 women. Our aspiration is to have at least 50 partners before we hand over the network to the partners completely. We're successful because we're driven by evidence. We're successful because we have national partners. We work with national coalitions. We're driven by the decisions made by our partners and the coalitions that form in our partners' organizations. These coalitions are normally women professionals wanting to see certain things changed. We have a robust M&E system. Again, we ask our partners to make commitments on what they'll do and how many women and girls they'll benefit on a quarterly basis. We go back to them on a semi-annual basis and ask them, were you successful? What challenges you faced? What do you want to tell other partners, etc. We're very good at organizing convening events and gaining the benefit of actual networking from the network. And then we also work on a bunch of knowledge and resources for We Power partners. The steps to joining We Power is quite straightforward, but it involves a process of building consensus within the organization and getting endorsement from the senior management of the organization to what the women practitioners want to do.
1 minute.
Thank you, Natalie. With this, let me acknowledge the excellent support that we've always received from World Bank colleagues and sector stakeholders in all the 8 South Asian countries and the support from SAT-TFP and SMAP, our donors. Let me stop at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gunjan. And it's always great to hear how we're contributing to close gender gaps all across the globe. So I'm going to switch to Spanish, but I just wanted to thank you for being here and for promote this type of work for other regions. Entonces, pues bueno, ahora después de haber escuchado las
So
presentaciones,
having heard all of your presentations, sorry, I had interpreting on. So as I was saying, I would like to now ask my panelists to turn on their cameras because I want to ask you a couple of questions about the different common elements that we can find from your presentations. As you can see, we cannot work on our own. We need to try to find collaborations in cooperations with other types of organizations that might allow us to bridge the gender gap. But at the same time, we need to think about data beyond data itself. We need to think about what we can do with data in order to have better societies. And in that sense, I think that the message that you shared, all of you, is similar. So I would like to start with Roberto, my friend, and ask you, how would you describe the internal process of implementing this gender policy? We know that this is something new, especially somewhere where people might not necessarily think that we need to have a gender policy in a regulator agency, right? So, well, there are many things to consider. First of all, we need to have people on board who believe in this. We also need to get the support from authorities. One needs to be open and aware of this issue. And we need to create a long-term vision for regulations and for organizations as well. And I think we need to find at the level of the board of directors people who are on board with our ideas and who are sensitive enough to know that we need this gender policy and to conduct other related activities. Thank you, Roberto. I would like perhaps now to jump to Gunjan, because I also think that this relates to being at the forefront of policies and about how we might project ourselves as key examples in the region that might be replicated, both in the case of Costa Rica and Colombia are particular in that they are innovative. So Gunjan, the question would be, what would you recommend other regions if they want to implement something similar to what you're doing in South Asia?
Thanks, Natalia. I think Colombia is kind of doing already what we're doing in South Asia. What I would suggest is always start with data and evidence, because a lot of the thinking or structuring of the problem is going to be based on that. If the evidence is right and if the structuring of the problem is on the mark, then it's very easy to convince people to join forces and do small things. That's essentially what we do. We had the evidence. It was very easy for us to persuade women in the utilities to ask their management to bring about small changes. Thanks.
Gracias, Gunjan. Thank
you, Gunjan. What you were saying about starting with small changes and then moving into big major structural changes for the participation of women in utilities, especially based on information, is great because we can show people what we can do at the level of the institutions, and that's basic. So now going back to Maribas, what do you think are the stakeholders that we need to reach? You mentioned that the implementation of the stamp came from the private sector. You said that you did this in a very efficient way. So which were the stakeholders that participated in the creation of the guidelines for gender equality?
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. I think that the main message here is that we cannot work on our own. And as I told you before, the main challenge for the Ministry of Mines and Energy, it's the technical capacity. We don't have enough people for an activity like these guidelines for gender equality in the sector. And I would like to mention the contribution of international cooperation that has been key to us. Just to mention some, I mean, there are 2 people in charge of gender equality issues in the ministry, and we could do that thanks to international cooperation. And it has to do with resources, but also with the experience and being able to know more about implementation in other contexts. Just to mention a few of them as a way of thanking the support, the current support that we are receiving. For instance, construction of guidelines for gender equality. That was thanks to ICLAC and the IDB, among others. Also, Equipar label is an initiative promoted by UNDP in Colombia together with the Ministry of Labor. And this has been the best initiative for us to leverage all the gender issues at internal level. Also, the World Bank has decided to contribute to this initiative. The sexual study of gender equality included more than 70 companies, and that was funded by the World Bank. And we did that through a web tool for the tool of gender equality. And these are some of the examples of some of the lines we have been working with. I don't want to take too much time, but I would like to acknowledge this contribution that is not only that has to do with funding, but also with the experience. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel once again, but to make the most of input tools and techniques that have been already used in the region and that are available to us. Thank you very much, Mari Paz. And I think that you mentioned something that is very relevant. That is basically resources, what we need to continue with this kind of initiatives, how to generate capacity within the organizations so that these are not just isolated activities, but on the contrary, activities that are created and evolve in time. Because inequalities, we know they are here according to the global agency. And that is a reality that we need to improve. And we need to improve this situation. Something else, and connecting what you have said, how do we make sure that these policies continue in time? So these are not just activities that change with one government and the next. What do we need to do to ensure this continuity of practices? First of all, we need to raise awareness and to provide training both internally and externally. Secondly, these policies take time to change. In Costa Rica, we have worked continuously in environmental and sustainable policies, and I think that gender policies are here to stay. What we need to do is to provide training, this policy in specific actions, include them in regulations, technical regulations to empower our colleagues and to develop actions in the territories so we can create the conditions so that women demand these kind of changes and this for them to enjoy these rights. It is very important for this to be top down, but also bottom up. Thank you very much, Roberto. So top-down approach, it always works, but we know that it's good to involve those that are directly affected by these issues. We are talking about people. We are not talking about just some elements that we can manage as we please. Gunjam, then, according to the information gathered with WePower, what do you think? Which do you think are the social barriers that we need to overcome, that women need to overcome to be part of the energy sector?
Thanks, Natalie. So the barriers are largely normative. It's a sector that has been traditionally dominated by men engineers, and for a woman who has not seen other women in position of leadership or in technical roles, it's a bit difficult to break the norm and pursue a completely different career. And I think that's one of the major problems that we've we're kind of solving through the We Power Coalition. We have different stakeholders from different organizations, all working together to remove these normative barriers, to change the idea about what women can do in the transitioning energy sector. Thanks.
Gracias, Gunjan. Y finalmente, antes de
Thank you, Gunjan. And before moving on to the Q&A section, I would like to ask one last question to Maripaz. What do you think are the challenges ahead for the implementation of these policies? You have already told us about them, but quickly, can you go over them again? Basically, the first one I would say is technical capacity, but also we cannot be constantly depending on the support of a third party. So the challenge that we are facing for this year is how to start growing and to ensure that the strategies designed so far can continue in time without any kind of sponsor. Another challenge is to try to take all these guidelines to the territory. These were designed from the central authority, and we need to strengthen them in the region together with local authorities, communities, companies, emphasizing the community aspects of all this. When we talk about gender issues, in general, we just want to increase the number of women in the labor sector, but there are other aspects that need to take into account. For instance, gender violence against women, or aspects related to energy poverty, how to have access to services or not. And that is something that we cannot ignore. And also to continue developing tools that can be replicated in other contexts. And I think that is another challenge that we are facing. I also believe that we need to be able to allocate specific resources to continue implementing our projects. And taking that into account, we have designed a guide to include gender equality in our planning. And lastly, I would mention the cultural change. This is not an easy task. Try to overcome these barriers and to bridge these gaps. It has to do with what we do in the sector, but also the internal change that every individual need to have, so we can have a more inclusive approach, and that cultural change takes time. So that is a challenge that we really need to face in every day. So we need to increase labor available for this. For instance, when it comes to students finishing their courses, there are many challenges ahead, but I think we are going in the right direction, and we are committed to continue making progress. Thank you, Maripaz. And I think that that cultural change, maybe it's one of the most important aspects, especially because in many cases, when we start discussing these issues, we talk about increasing participation of women, but sometimes we forget the other 50% of the population. What can men do to improve and to bridge this gap? First, to be more involved in household chores, to make it easier for women to overcome those barriers. Okay, no more questions from my side. So let's see what our colleagues here have asked. Alma Gabriela from Honduras. She wants to know about funding. Who is funding these gender equality studies, and how you make sure that these are sustainable? Are they being implemented every year, once every 2 years? Maybe that is a question that you can ask, Roberto. Well, in general, this initiative started and it was promoted by the World Bank. They provided a baseline so that we can identify the gaps and the policies to be implemented. And we believe that thanks to this initiative, we created a need. In the past, it wasn't a need, and now it is. So we hope to have international support for this. But if we don't, we need to make an effort because we know that we get very important and significant information to define a baseline and the policies to be implemented to bridge that gap. Thank you very much, Roberto.
And this is written in English, so that's why I'm reading it in English. Thanks for your presentation. My question is, can you mention how WePower has helped to promote new public policies or legislations in which countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. So the solid examples of these are in India with the Energy Efficiency Services Limited and Bangladesh with Bangladesh Rural Electrification Board. In both these agencies, we are working on what we call a program for results operation. And as these organizations are trying to develop their sustainability plan, they've integrated gender elements into it based on the WePower engagement. Besides that, in Pakistan, we've been very successful working with the hydropower companies, where the hydropower companies foresee the need to have more women trained for the work in hydropower construction, contract management, land acquisition, work with GIS, and then also in hydro operation. We're working in a province called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is more conservative than other provinces in Pakistan. And there too, the organization that we work with, the Pakhtunkhwa Energy Development Organization, is very actively going to the universities and trying to build capacity of the next cohort of women engineers and professionals to work on their hydropower projects. Let me stop at that.
Gracias, Gunjan.
Thank you very much, Gunjang. Very interesting. That was very interesting. A question that may be a little bit controversial here. Let's see who wants to answer this question. I'm a teacher and I teach engineering. The number of female students is in general lower. However, the hiring rates, it's higher for women than for men. Can we talk about gender equity there, of discrimination against men? Before you make any comments, only 30% of labor that works in energy are women, and most of those women do not work in engineering. When we talk about renewable energy, that percentage increases a little bit. However, the proportion of engineers, it's very low in women. So whoever wants to answer that question, Roberto, you have the floor. I have more than 30 years of experience working at university, and I have seen the incredible development of capacities and potential of women. We need to acknowledge the fact they have more energy and more dedication, and probably they have the possibility of having access to those positions that are still fewer than those for men. We are making efforts to try to hire more women, more managers, and more female engineers. But sometimes we have limitations in the offer. I think that it's a structure limitation, and I think we're going to solve it in the short term. But why? Because of the dedication and capacity, women are getting to have more positions. Yeah, I also wanted to say, and that has to do with Roberto's contribution, we don't have context information of which country we are talking about, in which context that happens, and how much the sector is developed. For instance, in Colombia, engineers here, men and women, I'm telling you because my husband is an engineer, because in some cases, basically because of the changes in price, it was a drop in prices and there were no new positions. We need to have context information, but it's important to analyze that because in the countries, in the region, do not behave like that. And numbers show that female participation is still lower than that for men.
But I do want to remind you that when we talk about equity, we all have equal rights, but we all get what is owed to us. So in that sense, if the participation of women is growing within this sector, then that's something to note, because the labor market is not necessarily happening. And gender equality is simply that we should all have the same possibilities of accessing the labor market, of remaining within the market, and then of growing in it. We know that the higher the level and the hierarchical spot within an organization, the less likely it is for women to occupy those roles, and that's something that we should consider. And I don't think that this is discrimination against men. I think that there is a main role that men have in the possibility of creating new masculinities that open up spots for women. Having more spots for women does not mean that men are being displaced. It just means that we are sharing future together. Thank you for that answer. Thank you to my panel, to my dear panelists. This is an interesting topic, and we cannot definitely cover everything in an hour. We need to continue having space for these discussions and sharing information. But now, Maribas, someone asked about that online course that you mentioned. Could you please share it in the chat? And then thank you, Alade. Thank you to the IDB and to all of you who participated in the organization of this panel and who joined us today. We are now moving into the second panel of this afternoon. My IDB colleagues will be leading it, so please continue online. Thank you, Maribas. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Kumchan.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for your moderation, Etieli, for moderating. We want to thank the attendees for joining us today. And thank you, all of you who are following us in our social networks and in our YouTube channel. In a couple of minutes, we will be starting with roundtable number 2 on infrastructure services with a gender focus. Please remain with us.
Y efectivamente vamos a dar paso a la mesa 2.
Let us now begin with roundtable 2 on infrastructure services with a gender approach. Today, we have Virginia Snyder from the IDB as moderator. Please, Virginia, turn on your microphone and camera so we can get started with the roundtable. Welcome.
Virginia, ¿nos escuchas?
Virginia, can you hear us?
Activar tu cámara y
Could you
micrófono.
please turn on your microphone and camera?
Ahí. Buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan ahora?
Hi, good afternoon.
Bienvenida.
Estupendo. Muchas gracias. Bueno, muy buenas
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this second part of the gender and energy for the 6th Energy Week. It is a true joy to be with you today as moderator for this event. And thank you for joining us. I am Virginia Snyder. I'm a senior energy specialist in the energy division of the IDB in Washington, D.C. And today I have the pleasure of moderating this panel where the panelists will be talking about relevant topics, especially after the COP26. So we will be talking about the energy transition, labor market, and gender. And the discussion of these topics will be fundamental for our economies from now onwards. So to the panelists, welcome, and please turn on your cameras so I can introduce you. I think I have pretty much everyone here. I'm going to be introducing each and every one of you. I have Araí Monteforte, someone that I've known for many years. She's a great champion on this topic. Araí works in economies, finance, and policy, focusing in the energy sector. She has over 15 years of experience in international domestic experience in the energy sector, working with private companies, government entities, and apart from that, she has conducted an amazing work in gender topics. I have Erica Simmons, Vice President of Workforce Development.
Sector of youth development, national service, green construction, and workforce development. She's been leading efforts on workforce development for many years now, and she's going to share with us the experience specifically for the solar sector, which is extremely relevant for us. Les presento también a Cristina Díez.
I also want to introduce Cristina Diaz. She is the director of Open Hydro. She is an engineer. He specializes in hydropower and environment, and she will be telling us about a relevant topic, which is the hydropower sector. I also have Marcos Fernandez. He is a chemical engineer, graduated from the Universidad de la República, and he works in the National Energy Directorate of the Ministry of Industry, Energy, and Mining in Uruguay. And for over 15 years, he has worked in the sectors in the regulation of energy markets, and he has participated in the design and development of public policies in the area. We also want to welcome Patricia Tato. She is also a champion for gender equality. She's the president of the Network of Women in Renewable Energy in Mexico, and she launched MERM not that long ago. She is a leader in sustainability, renewable energy, and she has many years of experience in international work in renewables strategies, and it is a true pleasure to have her with us today. And last but not least, I want to introduce Alexandra Arias, who has ample experience also in the LAC region with regards to energies, and who has focused her work in the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency, and she has experience in gender matters as well. She works in the SICA. Welcome, Alexandra. So without further ado, I want to briefly introduce why it is relevant for us to discuss this topic. Can you all see my video? I'm trying to share my screen, but I'm not sure you can see it. Can you see it? Yes? Yes, we can see your video, yes. Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, the energy transition will be vital to align our economies with the Paris Agreement. And if we work on energy projects in the next 2 years in a structured, smart way, we have great opportunities ahead to incorporate women in all of the opportunities that will arise from the energy transition. These will be job opportunities. There will be opportunities for the creation of new policies that will come to be in the region thanks to decarbonization and energy efficiency. One of the estimations of the IEA tells that by 2030 at the global level, with the energy transition, we will have 14 million new job openings. So imagine if those 14 million job positions could be divided equally between men and women. But we know also from IRENA that only 32% of women participate in renewables. So we have a very long way ahead of us, and only 20% of those women in our region belong to the sector. So for us in the IDB, this is one of the main pillars of our 2025 vision. And this is something that we are convinced we should do. And because of that, we implement this and we prioritize this in our investment projects. So now I want to get started by yielding the floor to Arai so she can present how she, with her experience and knowledge, considers this topic. So Arai, you have the floor. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Yes. Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Virginia, for inviting me to this panel and for giving visibility and room for such an important matter for the sector. The energy sector, as you say, is facing disruptive changes at the technological level, but also because it plays a necessary role to manage climate risks and increase resilience. And it is key to have a diverse labor force to deal with these changes. We cannot have a creative, diverse, dynamic workforce if we are not using all of the workforce available. So I wanted to explain how gender equality benefits the energy sector. And for this, I want to share information about one of the biggest programs that we are implementing. This is a program that Engendering Industries has been implementing. We work to increase financial opportunities for women and improve gender equity within the labor market. And many times, one of the things that we realize we need to deal with when trying to find partners in policymakers and ministries and in the private sectors is that we need to talk about a business case for female leadership. We know that there's growing evidence establishing a correlation between more female leadership in corporate in general and having better results in companies. An example of this is an analysis from Ernst & Young for board of directors from the 200 top public services companies that discovered having more women in these boards of directors create more return on investment. And the top 20 most gender diverse utilities significantly outperform the bottom 20 in terms of return on equity. And that difference can, of course, could mean trillions of dollars in earnings. We also believe that gender equity could add as much as 12 trillion to the world economy and 1.1 trillion to Latin America's economy. And evidence still shows a correlation between gender diverse executive leadership teams with having more resilient, more productive, and more diverse companies. And that's what the assessments show from the World Bank and from many consultancy companies as well. We are currently working with over 41 partners across 27 countries. In Latin America, we work in Colombia and El Salvador and Dominican Republic and Grenada. And these are the different intensive program works that we deliver.
But we also have pilot programs that are taking place in Latin America. We have 52 participants from 16 different organizations in Colombia, Dominican Republic, Peru, and El Salvador. And right now, these organizations are part of the energy sector and the water sector, where we really focus our work, but also in sectors such as mining, gas, and oil. Just for you to have an overview of what the program does, we do have a framework for gender equality best practices with more than 140 tools and a evidence-based methodology. I think that is one of the lessons learned in the first round when we talked about evidence collection in the sector to try to understand and define baselines to achieve these results and being able to measure and try to find space for opportunities. Also, a 2-year intensive program, an accelerated program that takes 6 months, and also tailored change management coaching with a coach that is an expert in gender issues and change management. Every single stage of the life cycle of the employees is one entry point. How to identify talent, how to recruit candidates, how to provide training, and also succession planning and promotion. There are several different factors that can be used in this, even though and these are included in our analysis framework. I want to stick to time. I don't want to expand on results, a number of women hired and promoted, or policies implemented by the companies. But I would like to give you some specific examples. Edesur, for instance, we also that's another company in El Salvador, but Edesur is a company in Dominican Republic with more than 800,000 clients in the southern region of Dominican Republic. We 3,300 employees that represent 37% of them are women. Edesur set as their main objective to increase female representation in technical areas and in leading positions and in senior positions. As we mentioned in the previous panel, maybe there are a lot of women that get hired as soon as they get the degrees, but as you move on the different positions, our data show that as you increase in the positions, fewer women you can find. So the objective was to increase the female presence in the top positions. And also several other aspects that were a concern to them. For instance, gender violence, the company image, there were different aspects that were of concerns for the company, and they wanted to improve those aspects through this program. And this program is aligned with all these priorities of the companies. So when it comes to hiring and promotion, they hired 223 women, 224 were promoted in 2 years. They provided training to 50 department heads in a gender inclusive language workshop. 2,237 women upskilled on technical and soft skills for career advancement. And also, when it has to do with COVID, Edesur hired a female medical doctor and psychologist to support employees during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, they ran a work-life balance workshop, sensitizing staff on the need to share domestic and care work during COVID. When it comes to corporate culture and leadership, they got 21 influential male company leaders committed to becoming ambassadors for gender equality. And that is the importance of having male champions in this area. to become ambassadors for gender equality at Edesur after attending male engagement workshops. When it comes to policies and grievance management, they created and adopted anti-discrimination, gender equity, paternity leave, sexual harassment. There was a whole range of policies. And lastly, also business performance improvement. They decreased revenue loss from 28% in the fiscal year 2019 to 22% in fiscal year 2020. And this was due to improved service quality. After a female management started working in the Department of Communications. When this manager was hired, she started an aggressive campaign for debts to be collected. Company image improved a lot after this female manager took over. They were using the social media for this, both to improve the company image and also the CEO's image. And then also there was an increased retention rates to 95% of women and 92% of men. That could be all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arai. And we can see here the importance of this project that can be replicated. And it is, in fact, being replicated by some companies. But the recruitment process, training programs, also the corporate culture, corporate policies, benefits, and also all the improvement indicators when it comes to business that are so important. Thank you very much, Arai.
And Erica, you're gonna bring us a perspective that is so relevant for the region because you're a champion on the issue of solar. So please, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Erica Simmons, pronouns she, her. I'm with Grid Alternatives, a nonprofit that operates in the US, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Nepal. And we are champions of a transition to clean energy that includes everyone. And women are certainly at the center of that. We know when it comes to justice on the economic side, on the racial side, on the climate side, that we win when women are engaged, leading, and trusted resources. We've about 5 years ago now, specifically started a Women in Solar campaign within our organization. We noticed the lack of representation throughout solar and found that we were in a particularly good spot to create change there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to speak a little bit from my perspective. I really enjoyed the last presentation and what I saw there that we definitely have experienced ourselves. It's really important to approach the engagement of women in this space, the growth of women in this space in layers. It takes I'm a basketball player. It takes a full court press to really get the job done, and you've got to approach it from many angles. What we noticed.
Are you uploading the presentation? We don't see it yet. Maybe one more click, perhaps.
Yep. Let me try that again. Share.
And it's coming. There you go. Now you got it. Thank you.
All right, good. All right, let me get it going full screen again. Sorry about that. So what we noticed is throughout the industry, after a few years of our campaign, we saw more conversation opening up in the industry. And there were a lot of women-related groups developing, but we didn't see a big focus or representation in construction. And I'm pretty biased towards construction. I grew up as a kid who's super interested in buildings. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to know how to learn tools, but there was an opportunity for me. And finally, when I was in high school, I got to volunteer with a group called Habitat for Humanity. And all of a sudden, on those sites, I was getting tools put in my hand. I was learning how to build houses, and I was also, doing work that felt good because I was benefiting families that could use the support and a safe home to live in. And throughout my career, I ended up being involved in work-based learning experiences. So the type of workforce development I've been doing with Grid Alternatives and my former organizations is really getting folks into a job site, a work experience. And it's super important because you can say, go do this, but if folks can't see that, one, they're capable, that they can learn the skills and that they can be supported, it's really hard to enter industries where you don't see yourself represented. So our efforts around women in solar is definitely connected to our mission for social and environmental justice, super important for economic opportunities. And we have an industry that really needs that impact. This information is from a 2019. It is a US-based study, but I'm pretty sure it's reflected in many countries where not only do we have underrepresentation, but we have a gap in regards to how folks are paid. We have a difference in regards to who's in leadership. And we just have a bias that goes into the recruitment process that impacts us all. When we do this, what we've approached it with is multi-layered, including getting cohorts of women into training opportunities so that they can learn this space. We broke it up into 6 categories. We're a nonprofit, so we got women involved on the investment and donation side. We've got women in the white collar space who would join us at SPI, Solar Power International, the biggest solar conference, so that they can network, get exposed, get mentors. Super important, right? Again, to go into a space, see yourself represented, and have mentors and support there to say you can do this. We did boot camps. It's hard to understand the nature of the industry if you don't get to touch it, right? If you don't get to experience it. So short-term opportunities for women, a week, 2 weeks, to actually learn the details of the industry, learn what the career opportunities are, get to do some hands-on type of work so that they can see, oh, I'm capable of doing this. And actually, I'm pretty darn good at it. And then support. So exposure, education, training, support, all these things coming together and creating a network, a community that can carry you through it. We've been able to model this within our organization and see folks move on to other companies and organizations doing this work. I mentioned I wanted to focus on construction, and I'd like to provide you an example of a program that we developed and then focused it specifically for women. So our installation basics training course combines a classroom curriculum, a lab curriculum, and then actual direct hands-on experience, along with employment readiness training and safety training and credentials valuable in the industry. It also allows, in this situation, for women to be doing it together. We've found that when women can be in course together, it provides a sense of strength, of comfort, to break out of the norms, to be yourself, and to perform better in training than if folks were apart. We take folks through, you could come in with never having touched a drill before to, having grown up doing construction projects with your family. But super important that we create spaces where you don't necessarily have to come in with a lot of experience. Imagine, right? Many of our cultures don't necessarily encourage women or girls to get interested in the space. So in order to get women engaged, some of them will have to start from zero, from scratch. So we try to present an environment where everyone is welcome, and we'll take you from wherever you are to get you the skills that you need. And when we talk about the full cycle of experience, right, you have to be cognizant in your recruitment that if you're dealing with a group that isn't typically recruited for these things, it takes very intentional effort to gather folks in. We did our Women in Solar initiative from about 2015 to 2019, where it was a very publicized, encouraged initiative within our organization. And we've seen the difference from then to the last couple of years where it hasn't been a full-on initiative. Less intention was put in, and we've seen the drops in numbers. That's something we're learning on our side, is when you start something, you got to keep it going for a while. Getting women engaged in industries that they're typically not told they should be in, typically not trained for, means very intentional work on the recruitment end. Now, it's one thing to say, hey, come join us. It's another thing to, hey, go take a job somewhere. You want to develop confidence, and that's what the training is about, preparing folks for the job search. But I want to talk about the other end of it, retention once somebody gets a job. We've seen it for people of color. We've seen it for women, where they are very talented, totally capable of doing the work, but then enter work environments that are not welcoming, that are sometimes hateful. And we have companies that haven't necessarily built cultures that appreciate gender diversity, who are losing out on great talent because they are pushing folks away even after they hire them. It is not enough to hire. You must have an environment where folks are welcomed, are promoted, and are supported. So I really want to stress that it's like we could do all the training programs in the world, but we're not going to be able to benefit for women getting into these fields if companies are not doing the work to create equitable environments in those workplaces.
Erika, we have 30 seconds to wrap up.
All right, so here's some quick highlights from our work in Nicaragua. We introduced this training this year, have trained a couple cohorts of 8. I'll let you enjoy the pictures here. We were able to continue despite COVID, and have really inspirational words from our graduates, and we're happy to share information with you all on how we do this work. And Janine Smith is in charge of our international programs, and you can feel free to follow up with her to learn more. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Erika. Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you for making put the emphasis on what you said. You can have training, but if you don't have a comprehensive program, then make sure that the workforce that finally got into the market is, that they stay. Then it's not going to work. So thank you so much for for doing that and for making that point. I appreciate it. Let's go now to Cristina. Cristina Diez.
Cristina Diez, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for allowing me to share the perspective from the hydropower sector. When we talk about the hydropower sector, of course, it's important to contextualize the importance of the gender perspective for energy transition and climate change. Even if gender equity is a human right, we also know that it's the smartest choice at the financial level, and that's what I wanted to share today. Also, with regards to the energy transition, as has been mentioned in the high-level ministerial climate forum on just energy transitions, it is necessary to accelerate the integration of transformative gender approaches to bridge the gender gap and empower women. On the other hand, gender equity measures improve climate resilience. And as you can see over here in the left chart, countries that have higher gender inequality are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. And on the contrary, as you can see to the right, countries with low levels of gender inequality tend to have higher levels of climate action. So it becomes clear that gender equality improvements not only help with climate resilience, not just for women, but for society as a whole. There is also a correlation, and I can show it to you over here. There is this negative correlations between the consumption of renewable energy and CO2 emissions. So this is essential for us to reach gender equality, reduction of poverty, and to mitigate climate change. But at the same time, it is fundamental to empower women if we want to have energy that is sustainable for everyone. And this is especially relevant when we talk about the hydropower sector because the region has 200 gigawatts of hydropower in operation, which is a participation of over 45% of the energy mixes, and that is quite above the median average of 17%. So this shows the significance of the hydropower sector in the development of the economies of the region, and that related to the energy transition and climate change is interconnected to the new role that we are expecting of the hydropower sector in the next years and decades with regards to providing more flexibility and reliability to have a higher penetration of wind and solar power, which of course is also necessary to reach the zero emission goals. But also within the context of climate change, this plays a major role for resilience, but also for adaptability. But then, what is the need to discuss gender diversity here? Well, this is something that you've already mentioned, but in general terms, when we're talking about renewables, we know that the percentage of women within the sector of renewable energies is 32%, which is 10 points above the traditional energy sectors. But still, this is not encouraging at all. I do not have specific data for the hydroelectrical sector, and I need that data, of course. But if we bear in mind this survey by Irina from 2018, 43% of the people who answered work in the hydroelectrical sector, so that can perhaps make us have a general idea where we're standing, but we need more data. Similarly to this, as you can see in the right, if we talk about how many women we have in board of directors, the best of scenarios is 20% of women in 100% of members, and that is relatively low. Now, despite these evident inequalities in renewables and in the hydroelectrical sector, there are proven benefits of including gender diversity plans in the electrical sector. First of all, from the productive point of view and from corporate intellectual capital, it has been proven that improving the flexibility to match and balance your personal and private life has a very positive impact in managing and getting employees, for example, to go back to work after becoming mothers. We also know how some companies have managed to reduce the number of employees who do not return to work from 60% to 4%. The second point is that if we consider what we expect out of the hydropower sector in the next years and decades, we need to especially face on innovation and digitalization. Hydropower is a robust technology, but it faces challenges ahead. We need to boost the use of variable renewables, giving more flexibility to the system, but we also need to modernize and digitalize the existing assets. So the hydroelectrical sector faces the challenge of successfully implement innovative ideas to face these challenges. And for this point, diversity is fundamental. Based on multiple analysis and research, those companies that have more diversity are 75% more likely to take innovative ideas to the market. In that sense, we can mention EY that says that StartCraft has the highest score in their diversity index. We also know that we just wrapped up COP26, and one of the key points mentioned there is that we need to increase transparency when providing information about the sustainability of companies. And in that sense, energy companies and hydroelectrical companies that have published their gender equality objectives in the UN Global Compact website have increased in the last few years the number of socially responsible investments, and the volume of socially responsible actions in the EDP increased by 9 points between 2019 to 2020. And additionally, I would like to highlight the relationship between gender equality and productivity. Studies show that those companies that have more gender diversity actually have more productivity. The question here is whether or not diversity is something that we accept culturally or not. A survey taken over 1,000 companies showed that in those companies where gender diversity was a part of the company and a part of the company's culture, the company was doing better. So in those sectors where gender diversity is important, the company gets a financial benefit. So it's not about imposing diversity, it's about educating and moving forward together. Additionally, we need to discuss the room for improvement within the sector. First of all, we need to try to increase the percentage of women who work in positions for decision making. And of course, this is most definitely associated with an improvement in the social reputation of the companies, but we also need to incorporate a gender perspective at the strategic level in the company. And in that sense, sadly, we know that, and this is data from the IEA, the public service and energy sectors have the lowest participation in gender diversity initiatives, less than 5%, as a matter of fact. So if we work harder here, we perhaps would see the benefit that those companies who are more inclusive even get 87% improvement in their decision-making processes. And apart from the things that we can do inside the hydroelectrical companies, there are things that we can do outside of them. We can demand for policies for more investment in R&D, because the more investment we have in R&D, we will have lower levels of gender inequality. And last but not least, I wanted to focus on innovation, because innovation will be key, not just for the hydroelectrical sector, but also for the empowerment of women. And there are two key points that I would like to note here. On the one hand, we know that sadly, women appear in less than 11% of patent applications associated to the energy sector, and only around 15% for applications of patents for climate change mitigation technologies. So I know that there's ample room for improvement here. And this relates to how many women we have in the research sector. And as you can see over here, when we are comparing the different regions, the LAC region is below Asia. So I would encourage you to continue in this direction, because you are doing very well here, and that will definitely integrate more women into the field of innovation. From Open Hydro and on behalf of the company, I would like to thank you for inviting us, because our vision is to have a planet without carbon emission that is resilient against climate change, where water and energy are accessible for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Thank you very much for your presentation, because yours is such a special sector for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we see just a few initiatives such as this. And I think that in the long term, it's going to be very hard to implement these policies if we don't start right now. We need to transform that subsector. And your presentation was very clear, and you suggested many different ideas. So thank you for that. Now, Marcos Fernandez from Uruguay, so that he can tell us about the job markets in Uruguay and the perspectives in that country. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Please tell me if you can see my screen.
Ahí viene, Marcos, está cargando. Te aviso cuando la veamos todos. Todavía no.
Not yet.
Ahí está. Adelante.
Yeah. There it is. Yeah, perfect. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Virginia and all the team for hosting the event and inviting me, having me today, sharing our experience here in Uruguay. And also something that is very important, to have this opportunity to learn from other experiences that are taking place in other countries. That is very useful to us, because we can learn from them. Well, we are talking about energy transition, and energy transitions that are taking place in different countries in Latin America and the world. And the objective of these transitions is to try to reduce emission of greenhouse gases in order to fulfill international commitments. We've seen that the efforts are focused on decarbonizing the typical sectors, basically electric generation. But lately, we've seen efforts also focused on other energy sectors and subsectors. So this can be the emerging energy sectors. That can be electromobility, storage, energy efficiency, and projects related to hydrogen development, also managing demand. Then it is clear that we have great opportunities ahead, because the development of these new technology sectors, they imply great opportunities to promote economic development and strengthening job opportunities. Sorry for the interruption. I don't know if we can only see one slide. Just to double check with you. No, so far. There, okay, this is my first slide. This was just my introduction. So as I was telling you, we have great opportunities and challenges ahead when we see the potential development of these emerging energy sectors. And there are questions that we need to answer in order to face those challenges and try to make the most of the opportunities that we have. So there are opportunities for the job market with different energy transitions that are taking place. And we have questions that need to be answered, such as how many new jobs are going to be created, what kind of jobs, or whether there is, or how to deal with possible gaps between demand and supply. For this, as Cristina was saying, it is crucial to have data available and reliable data. As from those baselines, we will be able to design the best public policies and the most efficient public policies. So now that's why I want to show you the results of this work, in which we had part of our team together with IDB and together with the authors that you can see on the screen: implications of the energy transition on employment, today's results, tomorrow's needs. And this study provided high-quality information about the present status of the energy sector in Uruguay. So basically, there was a survey to different companies in the energy sector or related to the energy sector. We also included companies that their main activity is not the generation of energy, but in the framework of Uruguay, we expanded micro generation and distributed generation. They end up providing energy to the grid. I mean, especially into UTE's grid. UTE is the state-owned company. So for Uruguay, we had reasonable response percentages, and that allows us to consider this data as reliable. Of course, that then when we are comparing this data to other results, and for 3 different countries, Uruguay, Chile, and Bolivia, we will have to take other aspects into account, scale, of course, of the percentage of non-response. But I will be addressing the data, presenting the data for Uruguay. The first finding of this work is that in the emerging energy sectors, the ones I mentioned, electromobility, energy efficiency, storage, there's still a large percentage of unskilled labor. Professionals in these areas, in the STEM areas, still nowadays represent a very low percentage of labor. And this offers a range of opportunities to define policies to strengthen the hiring of qualified workers in the STEM areas. Secondly, when we talk about gender gaps in the job market, especially in the energy sector, these are the results shown in this table. And as you can see, women participation in the energy sectors is still very low, far from the 50% that some of my colleagues mentioned. In the typical sectors, for instance, generation, we got 25% of women participation. However, in sectors such as emerging energy sectors, results were even lower, around 18%. Something that is special about one finding that is rather special is when we talk about the solar panel installation subsector in Uruguay, is the one that showed the highest percentage of women participation, with 91%. But this was an exception. In all the other sectors, except energy efficiency that reached 39%, all the other sectors that are related to consultancy, storage, electromobility, women participation was very low. I wanted to show these results, mainly focusing on emerging energy sectors, because we realize that although these results may be low, we identify an opportunity that through and via public policy, we may bridge this gap, this gender gap. Evidence is very clear, and this requires urgent measures by the government, those of us responsible of aligning public policies to promote changes in this area. Something else I wanted to mention about this work is the great challenge that these subsectors present for the future regarding the requirement of technical competencies. We need to work in that area together with the education authorities so that we can promote the interest and motivation in young children for STEM areas. There's a huge deficit in the country, so that we can adapt the different stages of education to adapt to the changes required in the energy sector. We have 30 seconds to finish. I just wanted to comment a program that we have that is called, we have certificates of energy efficiency implemented since 2016. And in 2019, and aligned with energy policies of the ministry, we included some values related to gender. This program is a call, an annual call for organizations and companies with some successful measures in energy efficiency. And this program, after assessing the different values, they can return up to 30% of the original investment. These values are related to gender, can be divided into three categories: vertical segregation, human resources management, and access of the organization. And these are the results that we got in the last 2 years. And they show that 30% of the organizations that participated in the call provided information related to one of these values. And the average grade that they had was 1.2, being 2 the maximum grade possible. And this represents an economic benefit for the organization. In this case, this represents a 20% increase on investment return. That could be all. Thank you very much. This is my contact information. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Marcos. It was really important to hear from you. We were talking about the perspective of the sector companies. We spoke about the solar and hydropower sectors. And now you're talking about the importance of public policy and of having governments analyze this data from the market in order to create state policies. I now want to very quickly go to Alexandra. You have 5 minutes. Alexandra, I yield the floor to you. 5 minutes, please. Can you see my screen? We cannot, I'm sorry. Okay, give me a second. Because we have another panelist, we have 15 more minutes, so please stay with us. Because I want everyone here to hear about what Patricia will tell us. Alexandra, try to share your screen. It's not working, I'm sorry. Give me just a minute.
Alexandra.
I think it's loading.
Mi cámara, Alexandra, es que ya llegamos al tiempo, ¿sí?
Okay, when I turn my camera, you know your time will be up, okay? Yes, perfect. I just wanted to provide a bit of information. First of all, I wanted to thank Olade and the IGB, the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency is located in SICA. We work directly with SICA, and we're part of a global network of centers located across the globe. And in this region, we have SICRE, the SICA Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, and then we have another one in the Caribbean as well. What we wanted to explain today is a particular survey and assessment we did in these SICA countries that are Central America and Dominican Republic. This was conducted by SICA EOS, and we created a baseline to see how the gender equality issue was in the region. The first issue we ran into is that we were lacking in information, and we got context and understand how the situation was thanks to the survey. The survey, first of all, dealt with the situation of women within the energy sector company. The aspect was what these companies were doing for the communities where the companies provided energy services. The members of SICA has over 70 members of the energy sector, but we started off this project 2020, precisely when COVID-19 first struck in the region. But even if that's the case, 23 companies participated in the survey. We had companies from the entirety of the energy sector, generation, transmission, distribution. We also worked with regulators as well. In very general terms, data, which also coincides with the information provided by the other panelists today, shows that 26% of the staff from these companies are women, and the remainder is men. I think it's below the 30% mentioned in the previous presentations. And this coincides with what my previous colleague was mentioning, which is that the energy sector is a highly technical sector, but even if that's the case, less than 13% of the staff comes from the energy sector. And in the case of women, the figure is even lower. And if we analyze the entirety of the staff of these companies, only 1% of these women come from engineering. We also conducted an analysis in order to determine within these companies how many women and how many men partook in decision making roles in these companies, and we determined that only 29% of decision makers in the companies were women. This is a very long survey, and I just provide a brief summary of the information that we collected. We tried to see whether or not companies have gender equality policies and gender equity policies, and what we heard was that most companies do not have gender equality and gender parity policies. Only close to 80% have gender equality policies and do not have them, and only 20 do. But there are certain companies that do, and we asked those companies that do whether or not they had a budget for those activities. And there are very few companies that have an allotted budget for gender equality activities. The second part that I wanted to share with you today is that we focused also on companies that have gender programs for the communities where they are servicing. One of the companies that we found was the GEO, is the geothermal generation company in El Salvador. The GEO has a great program for female empowerment in the cities where they have their generation plants. They provide trainings. I see you turned on your camera, Virginia, so I need to wrap it up. But as I was saying, they train these women and then they hired them to provide maintenance for their plants. There are similar examples in Costa Rica. There are similar examples in Nicaragua. And we also have cases for the regulators, the case of the Costa Rican regulator that also has a program for gender equality and for women. I would say that in summary, there is a lot more for us to do. There is a clear gender equality issue in the companies of the region, but we are providing support for that. We are partners to many organizations. We're working with many agencies, and we want to continue working with more organizations and agencies in order to support the region, create policies and strategies towards gender equality. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. The work that you do is so important. It is paramount to have information and data, especially for Central America and Dominican Republic. So thank you so much for sharing this information with us. Now, I want to yield the floor to Patricia Tato. Go ahead, Patricia.
Estás en mute aún. ¿Un clic más? No, todavía no te escuchamos. No te escuchamos, Patricia.
¿Me escuchas ahora?
Ahora sí, adelante.
Perfecto, creo que esto no sirve. Pues muchísimas gracias por la invitación y por tan buenas presentaciones esta tarde. La verdad es que yo creo que lo que estamos ahorita es uniendo la pinza de toda la investigación que se ha hecho ya también en el sector y el trabajo que ha hecho el Banco Interamericano y pues muchas otras organizaciones, ¿no? Para nosotras, yo soy presidenta de Mujeres en Energía Renovable en México. Iniciamos este grupo en 2016. Es una red de mujeres que creamos en México porque pues, no había esos espacios para mujeres y vimos necesario como una problemática importante de que no había mujeres en los puestos de decisión. Sin necesidad de tener un estudio a la mano, pues era evidente, ¿no? En los eventos, en las participaciones, en las juntas, en las reuniones, en los meetings. Y bueno, también tomar un poco de ejemplo de otros grupos internacionales que también venían empujando también la equidad de género en el sector de energía, pues decidimos mujeres independientes que trabajamos en el sector, que somos ejecutivas, directoras de empresas, fundar esta asociación que se llama MERM y empezar a investigar sobre estos temas dentro de nuestro mismo sector. Agrupamos ahora más o menos 50 mujeres. Bueno, todas trabajamos en energía renovable y a diario nos enfrentamos con los retos que nos están ustedes comentando. Y pues de ahí hemos también solicitado mucho apoyo de consultorías y de otros organismos para nosotros también ver cómo podemos más aportar en estos temas de equidad de género, ¿no? Una de las razones por las que nosotros ahora estamos aquí es porque fundamos una macro red que se llama Mujeres en Energía Renovable Latinoamérica. Les voy a compartir mi pantalla. La vemos todos ahí, ¿verdad?
Todos ahí. Sí, perfecto.
Entonces, es porque al nacer MERM surge también mucha inquietud por la región de qué era lo que estábamos haciendo y afortunadamente, bueno, hemos dado mentoría a varias organizaciones que también se han ido creando en la región de grupos de mujeres, ¿no? Que querían involucrarse también en esta toma de decisiones, que querían involucrarse también en presentarse en eventos, que querían involucrarse también en ser una parte más activa, ¿no? De este rol. Se hablaba mucho de la desventaja, ¿no? De la falta de participación de mujeres, de por qué no se incluían más a mujeres en STEM, etcétera. Y pues yo creo que esto ha permeado en toda la región, ahí es una preocupación regional y que también las mujeres que trabajamos en energías renovables a nivel regional, pues nos dimos cuenta que podíamos unir esfuerzos, ¿no? Y han ido creciendo grupos eventualmente en las diferentes regiones, en Argentina, en Brasil, en Colombia, en Chile, que afortunadamente junto con otras organizaciones también de grupos de ingeniería, con a lo mejor a otras organizaciones internacionales, han venido formándose estas células, ¿no? Lo que hicimos nosotros durante estos pues 5 años que tenemos ya fundadas fue como consensar cuáles eran las principales necesidades de nosotras, las mujeres que estábamos en puestos de dirección, y pues lanzamos este proyecto que, bueno, eventualmente queríamos hacer, buscamos socios, ¿no? Para este programa porque es un proyecto bastante ambicioso, es un proyecto que involucra tocar todos estos puntos, tanto a la academia, tanto a los gobiernos, tanto a las organizaciones o asociaciones que están impulsando las energías renovables, así como los mismos grupos aliados que tenemos de mujeres. Y bueno, este es un plan que se llama MER, Mujeres en Energía Renovable Latinoamérica, y que pues en nuestra visión lo que queremos hacer es, permítanme si esto se puede hacer chiquito. Sabemos los retos, ¿no? Que ya habíamos comentado, ¿no? Esto es un poquito lo que ya les acabo de mencionar. Somos un grupo de mujeres especializadas en diferentes disciplinas. Estamos apoyando principalmente los principios de empoderamiento del W20 y de ONU Mujeres y del Pacto Mundial de la ONU. Nosotros intentamos impulsar iniciativas sociales, educativas y de inclusión para lograr metas y empoderar a más mujeres en el sector. Vimos ya los números que nos acaban de mostrar, ¿no? Esos pues, son los desafíos a los que nos enfrentamos, ¿no? En cuántos porcentajes de mujeres hay en puestos técnicos y en puestos de dirección. Y de ahí, bueno, tenemos 3 objetivos en específico, ¿no? Le llamamos energía que empodera, porque pues primero nos enfocamos en que la mujer se vea, ¿no? Que tengamos esa participación activa en la inclusión en la toma de decisiones. La otra es la atracción y formación de talento. ¿Cómo vamos a captar más talentos, ¿no? Y cómo vamos a formar más mujeres líderes, cómo vamos a lograr que se lleguen a estas capacidades, qué tipo de convenios tenemos que hacer con instituciones y el networking, que lo vemos como un pilar de nuestra asociación, cómo creamos esta red de contactos para brindar más oportunidades a más mujeres y unir a más mujeres en este sector, ¿no? Vemos que es una problemática también porque las renovables tienen una tendencia también muy política, en donde ciertos países suben y bajan en cuanto a su interés en renovables, y pues eso también lo quisimos hacer a nivel red para ver cuáles son las preocupaciones de países como Argentina o México, por ejemplo, que ahorita no están favoreciendo tanto las energías renovables. En el caso de por qué también lo estamos haciendo, por qué hicimos este lanzamiento justo a la par de la COP26, porque pues también tenemos ese objetivo, ¿no? Ser un agente de cambio, que todas las personas que formen parte de esta red tengan conciencia que están reduciendo también la huella de carbono y que estamos enfocados en la descarbonización, que debemos de favorecer estos proyectos, ¿no? Sabemos que mucha inversión, muchos fondos están poniendo los ojos en proyectos con mujeres y pues lanzamos esta plataforma, ¿no? Que es una plataforma, es la primera plataforma de habla hispana, sobre todo que quisimos hablarle a nuestra comunidad latina. Casi todas las plataformas que existen son en otros idiomas, entonces somos la primera plataforma que habla en español, ¿no? Y pues buscamos ahorita contactar con gente de toda la región. Ahorita estamos en diferentes países, ¿no? Colombia, Chile, Brasil, Argentina. Esto va a hacer que las mujeres se interconecten a través de oportunidades para establecer contactos, desarrollar capacidades, compartir conocimientos, entrar a eventos y promover la participación. Esto lo queremos hacer como una interfaz fácil de usar para que las mujeres puedan conectarse desde Argentina, Brasil, México, y también se puedan conectar asociaciones, bancos, programas de desarrollo entre países, gobiernos y el mundo académico. Hasta ahorita, estas son las organizaciones que tenemos aliadas. Están todas invitados. Ojalá también los grupos que acabamos de mencionar, de ver en la charla, se unan, ¿no? Tenemos a CERA, a AMES Argentina, a Solmex World Energy Council, Voz Experta en México, el W20, Pacto 100, la Red REN, que es la Red de Renovables de América Latina, el CUEL de Chile, MERM, la Red de Energía Solar, también mexicana, el WEC de Global Will Energy Council, el BIDINVEST, las Mujeres de Oil and Gas, Global Women in Mining, la TAM Green, MER-RD, que es de Dominicana, y RECMED de Centroamérica. Como les cuento, esta invitación está abierta para que todas entre nosotros podamos comentar. Esta es una portada de la página que los invito a sumarse a nuestras redes, es www.merlatam.org. Y pues estos son un poco de los beneficios que vamos a dar. Está todavía, es un proyecto muy ambicioso, como les comentaba. Están todos invitados a sumarse a la red MER. Muchísimas gracias, Virginia, por esta oportunidad.
No, muchísimas gracias a ti, felicitaciones. Esto me parece que es sumamente importante y me pareció importante que nos vinieran a hacer la presentación a esta audiencia, porque con este tipo de organizaciones, y esta en particular, que es de habla hispana, que es primero que reúne todas las asociaciones, va a ser muy importante y muy relevante para unir fuerzas hacia esa transición energética y hacia un mercado con muchas más mujeres en nuestro sector. Estamos ya sobre la hora, pero de cualquier manera yo les quiero pedir a ustedes que en 30 segundos cada uno, y empezamos en el mismo orden que presentaron, la verdad que las presentaciones han sido fantásticas, les estoy súper agradecida, muy agradecida también a la audiencia que ha seguido conectada, pedirle que en 30 segundos nos dejen un punto que ustedes creen, o sea, ¿qué puede ser lo innovador que debemos hacer de ahora en más para lograr tener más mujeres en el sector? ¿Qué idea? Si no tienen ningún punto particular y quieren pasar la palabra a otro, adelante, pero pensando en ideas innovadoras, como nos mencionaba Cristina hoy, la importancia de la innovación, la importancia de invertir más en investigación y desarrollo y demás, pero ¿qué podemos hacer distinto para hacer ese salto? And for Eric, I don't know if you're getting the translation, but I'm just asking you guys in 30 seconds to please give me an idea, a new idea of what can we do to make a difference? What can we do to make this happen moving forward? Así que bueno, empiezo Araí, si estás lista y podés en 30 segundos, danos tu recomendación.
Me agarras en curva, pero yo pienso que este tema de innovación, o sea, ahorita estamos en un momento en que el sector requiere innovación, una descarbonización profunda de la economía, y en ese proceso las mujeres podemos traer una innovación y un dinamismo que no se ha utilizado plenamente antes. Entonces, crear estos espacios de conversación donde intercambiamos, donde damos ideas y donde podamos llegar a acciones, ¿no? O sea, realmente una de las cosas que me quedó a mí de la COP es, bueno, pasemos de los pledges a acción, y esa sería la parte.
Estupendo, gracias, Araí. Erica, if you want to give us your 30-second idea of what should we do different, or what should we do, something that we're doing but that we should continue doing and innovate. I don't see you there, Erica. Okay, if Erica is not there, we go to, vamos a Cristina entonces. Cristina.
Pues muchas gracias. Bueno, la pregunta es corta pero complicada, bueno, yo diría, desde el sector hidroeléctrico al final es un sector muy tradicional, pero del que se espera una gran innovación. yo creo que ahí es donde tenemos todos que pensar un poco pues qué hacer. Y puede ir simplemente desde el mero hecho de realmente creer en los beneficios que podemos encontrar siendo más inclusivos, realmente creer en la diversidad, porque estoy convencida que de esa manera al final, hemos visto que las capacidades de las mujeres está completamente probado. El número de mujeres en STEM ha ido creciendo, entonces ahora ya es más dentro de las compañías realmente creer en su potencial.
Estupendo, gracias Cristina. Marcos, ¿alguna sugerencia en los 30 segundos?
Por supuesto, yo creo mucho en la educación en la primera infancia, cambios culturales profundos que debemos programar en el mediano y largo plazo. Educar a nuestros niños, que van a ser los padres del futuro, para desde ahí potenciar todas las capacidades y en particular de las futuras mujeres del planeta.
Muchas gracias, Marcos. Adelante, Alexandra.
Yo apoyo totalmente lo que dice Marco. O sea, yo creo que nosotros tenemos que enfocarnos desde los niños y las niñas para poder que haya más mujeres, digamos, en este campo STEM, y que en un futuro muy cercano, pues las empresas del sector energético tengan una mayor cantidad de mujeres participando en los puestos que tienen, especialmente los técnicos.
Estupendo, gracias. Patricia.
Muchas gracias por la invitación y pues nada más es invitarlos a que conversemos todos y todas para que enfoquemos nuestros proyectos, nuestros presupuestos y todo para realmente trabajar unidos por la equidad de género y para ser más inclusivos todos los días. Muchas gracias, buenos días.
Estupendo, bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos nuevamente, muchas gracias por las presentaciones. La verdad que hicimos un barrido de temas que son sumamente relevantes para nuestro futuro, el futuro de América Latina y del Caribe. Yo creo que hay que apostar, hay que dejar de pensar en el business as usual. El futuro energético es distinto y no podemos seguir pensando de la misma forma que venimos pensando en los últimos 100 años. Entonces hay que avanzar hacia los cambios y el incluir a las mujeres en estos cambios va a ser gran parte de los resultados que vamos a alcanzar. Muchísimas gracias a OLADE por la organización de esto. Un abrazo para todos y que tengan un muy feliz fin de semana. Gracias, Gabriela, también. Un saludo.
Muchas gracias, Virginia. Agradecemos tu moderación, a los panelistas por sus grandiosas presentaciones y no queremos dejar de lado agradecerles a toda nuestra audiencia que ha permanecido conectada durante toda esta semana. Nuestros 3 primeros días de la 6ª Semana de la Energía nos llena de mucha alegría y pues les aprovechamos la ocasión para continuar, invitarles para el siguiente lunes 22 de noviembre que iniciamos nuestro 5º panel sobre integración energética. Este panel iniciaremos a las 9 de la mañana, hora de Quito, Ecuador, no se lo pueden perder. Y muchas gracias, muy buen fin de semana para todos.
Me llamo Carlota Camila. Soy de Venezuela y tengo 7 años.
Eu sou brasileira.
Soy de República Dominicana. Nací en México.
Yo quiero ser maestra y maquilladora.
Me gustaría ser mamá, modelo, youtuber y veterinaria, bailarina.
¿Querés jugar un juego?
Bueno, ¿qué juego?
Imagínate una historia sobre esta mujer.
Ay, tiene un monito.
Se llama...
María. ¿Se ve amable? Para mí trabaja en una heladería. Es peluquera. Tiene cara de trabajar de maestra.
Doctora, sí.
Tiene un novio. Me parece que tiene familia porque la veo feliz. ¿Le gusta jugar a la pelota con su nieto? Ella dice que es igual a nuestra directora del colegio, pero...
Es que tiene rulos como ella.
¿Ahora me cuentas quién era? Por favor.
Yo te voy a dar para leer una frase que dice qué hace en serio esa mujer, ¿va?
Mabel fue la primera ingeniera mujer en trabajar en una represa
hidroeléctrica chamada Salto Grande. Então ela não é doutora, ela ajuda com a eletricidade.
Cuando Blanca estudió para ser ingeniera, eran muy pocas las mujeres que seguían esa carrera.
Luisa trabaja para llevar electricidad al pueblo indígenas en Colombia. Oh, não me imaginei que era isso. Sim, eu fiquei impressionada. Eu não pensei que ela ia ajudar com eletricidade. Los científicos, lo que yo sé es que la mayoría son hombres. Pero a mí me parece que deberían haber más mujeres. Porque todas las mujeres tienen derecho de hacer lo mismo que los hombres. Todos pueden hacer lo mismo. Si quieren, si a alguno no le gusta, que no lo hagan. Capaz que de grande pueda ser ingeniera. A mí también me gustaría ser ingeniera. Capaz que sí, porque yo me sé todo sobre números. Como sé contar hasta 30.